A few weeks ago I made a video ominously titled Why the Elder Scrolls 6 Will Fail. Understandably, the video was pretty morbid since I focused on the worst aspects of the more recent Elder Scrolls games compared to some of the older ones. However, in this video I'm going to take a completely different approach. I'm going to be talking about what I think would make the next Elder Scrolls game good, and in order to do this I'm going to split the video into 4 main categories. I'm first going to discuss the quests and main story, then the lore, then the world and setting, and finally the gameplay. Timestamps will be present in the description, so you can easily navigate between the sections if you so wish. Without further ado, let's get into the video. The main quest is paramount when it comes to an Elder Scrolls game. It's from the main storyline that the rest of the game is really modelled off, and it sets the tone for an effective overall game, so there just needs to be a compelling story. Luckily, every Elder Scrolls game so far has had a pretty good story as far as I'm concerned, but some have definitely been better than others. Oblivion and Skyrim both had interesting plots, but the main quest was predictable and the villains fairly simple. If the Elder Scrolls 6 is going to compete with the likes of The Witcher 3, which set a new benchmark for fantasy games, the story is going to have to be a hell of a lot more complex, and there are various ways in which Bethesda may do this. A fairly obvious way is to simply make the antagonist more enigmatic and complex. I'd like to see the villain of the next game not actually be wholly evil. I know this sounds paradoxical, but in my opinion, the best antagonists are the ones that you can actually understand and sympathise with. Dagothur, for example, in Morrowind, was a pretty evil being. However, the elf's motives are completely understandable, and given Dagoth's unfortunate past, it can be understood why Dagothur was so hell-bent on eradicating the Tribunal. It would be great if the Elder Scrolls 6 could replicate this level of complexity in offering an antagonist that is not obviously evil. I don't want to feel a blind sense of victory in defeating the antagonist, but a nagging sense of emotional doubt and sadness mixed with a feeling of accomplishment. In essence, a composite feeling that's going to leave me wondering about whether what I did was ultimately correct. A main quest can't be complex and compelling enough these days if it lacks for choice. The Witcher 3 is a perfect example for this. I hope Bethesda take a leaf out of CD Projekt Red's book and offer a wide amount of choice throughout the main quest line, perhaps with different endings available for each individual quest along the main storyline, eventually culminating in a certain unique overall ending. The Elder Scrolls games have always been good at offering a freedom of exploration and characters to the player, but the series does need to catch up when it comes to the freedom to shape the game's overarching story. Another fairly obvious point is also to make the game's main NPCs more interesting and to improve their characterization. In order for the game to truly cultivate a feeling of attachment from the player, there just needs to be a selection of characters with whom they feel attached to. Of course, you're not going to get that feeling with every NPC, but it would be nice to see some deeply developed main characters. Personally, I'd be happy to have a smaller world and overall number of NPCs if the NPCs that were present were more interesting as a result. I realise creating an intimate relationship between the player and NPCs is especially hard because of the diversity of character creation in the Elder Scrolls games, but it is definitely doable. Suffice to say, I never really felt any connection at all with the likes of Delphine or Astrid, who seemed more annoying than anything. Lore is the bedrock of any fantasy RPG game. Without good lore, you can't have a good RPG. It's partly because of the depth of the lore within the Elder Scrolls games that they've generally been so good, but as I mentioned in my video about why the Elder Scrolls 6 may fail, there seems to be a lessening amount of lore complexity and exploration in each successive game after Morrowind. Now, you can label me a die-hard Morrowind fanboy, and that would probably be true, but the real truth of the matter is that, in link with the less complex stories of Oblivion and Skyrim, there's been a decrease in the complexity and availability of lore within games. Sadly, this has coincided with an increased focus from Bethesda on gameplay. If the Elder Scrolls 6 is really going to be successful, particularly with the older Elder Scrolls audience, then it needs to return to the roots of Morrowind and incorporate the lore and story more into the heart of the game. Players should be rewarded for actively reading in-game texts with unique information and quests, and there should be quests that incorporate an aspect of lore discussion, and I don't mean by necessarily forcing the player to read a book, that would be pretty boring, but perhaps simply through character commentary during a quest and similar instances to that. The main quest should permeate through the game's lore to make the world more immersive, in effect forcing the player to learn more about it anyway. Again, The Witcher 3 is a great example of how lore should be used in a game. Whilst just about anyone can pick up The Witcher 3 and enjoy it, because of the quests and characters being so deeply rooted and interconnected through the lore, the game seems so much more immersive and exciting. There is just a feeling that there is so much new stuff to discover. The freedom to explore the in-game world has always been a major strength of all the Elder Scrolls games, but there are still adjustments that can and should be made. Something I don't necessarily dislike, but am still not too happy about, is with the lack of leveled zones in Oblivion and Skyrim. I've always felt personally that having an RPG with distinct areas which have leveled quests and monsters makes the world much more enigmatic and adventure-like, so something I think most players would be pleased to see return to the series is a zoned map with different leveled zones. Another hugely important factor is the game's actual setting. Obviously, the next game is probably going to be set in Tamriel, but figuring out exactly where it will be set is difficult. Yet I strongly believe that Bethesda's best options would be either Hammerfell or the Somerset Isles. I've talked about the setting of the next game in other videos, so I won't go into too much detail here, but basically I think that both areas would contrast nicely to Skyrim in terms of their climate and ideology, and both could offer a new perspective on events such as the Great War, and also the Empire and the Old Merry Dominion respectively. I think it would be deeply interesting to actually experience a province that isn't within the Empire, something that hasn't been done yet. The quality of gameplay has fluctuated with each Elder Scrolls game. When I say gameplay, I don't mean graphics, which have obviously improved loads, but rather gameplay mechanics. That's more what I'm going to be focusing on. Skyrim's magic system was good in the way it appeared visually, but it was grossly oversimplified, and the Elder Scrolls 6 will really need to diversify magic to make playing as a mage actually doable, especially for a new player. I don't know why spellmaking was removed from Skyrim when it had successfully been implemented in Oblivion, and I don't know why there were comparatively so few spells to choose from in Skyrim than there were in Oblivion, Morrowind and earlier games. The removal of the class system I too thought was a mistake. True, there was more freedom in Skyrim to then progress however you wished, but I feel like the class system just made the game feel much more like an RPG, in that you feel much more immersed rather than just developing eventually into an all-round god who excels at everything. You have to admit that 99% of characters created in Skyrim ended up being OP stealth archers. In link with that idea, the class system also needs to be balanced. A badly implemented class system is probably worse than no classes at all. New weapons would be a nice touch to the gameplay of the next game as well, but that's not necessarily essential. You'd assume that Bethesda would include new weapons purely as a matter of principle in it being a new game. A really important thing I think needs to be added is a true open world, with minimal loading screens. I realise that Skyrim is 6 years old now, so I guess you can't necessarily blame it for having so many loading screens, but I would seriously expect the next game to be more seamless, with next to no loading screens at all. Again, you can look at The Witcher 3 for evidence that this idea can work perfectly. In addition to this, a semi-breakable world would be cool, but I know this would be pushing the barriers a little in terms of hardware maybe, depending on the scale it was done. Maybe in certain quests or scenarios which involved battles or sieges, there could be visible structural changes to the world. The best Elder Scrolls 6 will be a game that excels in all the elements discussed in this video, plus maybe a few others that I haven't thought about. There's no use in having an immense sense of freedom and amazing gameplay in a world that feels hollow because of a lack of lore and story. A good combination of all these factors would render the next game good in my own opinion. However, for the next game to truly succeed, there's one feature it absolutely must have. Loot boxes. Loot boxes are the key money exploitation tool for developers, so if I can't waste hundreds of pounds or dollars on loot box progression in the next game, then I'll be sorely disappointed to say the least. Obviously, that's a joke, but personally, I'm fairly optimistic about the next game, but I do have my reservations and worries outlined in my other Elder Scrolls 6 video. But of course, this is just my own opinion, and that doesn't mean it's correct. I strongly encourage you to post your own ideas in the comment section below regarding this matter. Anyway guys, thanks for watching this video, and I'll see you in the next one.